The first sound Malik heard each morning was not the bird song or the gentle voice of family, as he remembered from his village. It was the rattle of iron, chains scraped against stone as slaves stirred awake in the dark, damp quarters beneath the estate. The air was sour with sweat, mold, and despair. A single torch burned dimly, barely illuminating the crowded space where men, women, children huddled together like animals in pens. Malik shifted his body, his back stiff from the cold earth that served as a bed. The iron shackles around his ankles clinked as he moved, the familiar weight pressing against his bones. His body still carried the marks of yesterday's labor, raw welts on his shoulders, blisters torn open across his palms. Every muscle ached, yet there was no question of rest. Rest was a privilege reserved for those who owned, not for those who were owned. A door above creaked open, and with it came the harsh voice of Hernan, the overseer. "Up, dogs, out. The sun waits for no slave." A whip cracked against the wooden frame, loud enough to send even the exhausted children scrambling to their feet. Malik rose slowly, steadying a younger boy beside him who had nearly stumbled. The boy's eyes were wide, hollow, and frightened. Malik gave him no words could draw attention. He only pressed a steadying hand on the boy's shoulder before shuffling toward the narrow stairs. The slaves emerged into the pale light of dawn. Estate loomed around them, sprawling fields, stone walls, and the distant silhouette of Cordoba's towers and mosques, now silenced and repurposed under Christian rule. Malik inhaled the crisp morning air, but it carried no freedom. Instead, it smelled of tilled earth, sweat, and smoke. Faster, Hernan barked. Riding on horseback, whip coiled at his side, his eyes fixed on Malik. "You beast. Carry the plow today." Malik's stomach twisted. The plow was meant for oxen, heavy and punishing. Hernan enjoyed forcing Malik to drag it through the fields, knowing his strength made him capable. But at the cost of his body breaking down faster than the others. The iron blade of the plow cut deep into the soil as Malik strained forward, ropes biting into his chest. Behind him, Hernan rode slowly, watching, waiting for the smallest falter. The other slaves bent over rows of earth, planting, sowing, watering each under the threat of punishment should their pace falter. The sun rose higher, scorching the bare backs of the men and women. Sweat poured down Malik's face, stinging his eyes. His thoughts drifted, unbidden, to a memory, his mother's soft voice singing him awake. The smell of millet cooking over a fire, his father's laughter. He had been free once, a son, not a slave. The memory was a cruel comfort, reminding him of what had been stolen. By midday, Malik's knees buckled, the plow caught in the soil, refusing to budge. His breath came in ragged gasps, his chest burning. Hernan dismounted slowly, savoring the moment. He uncoiled his whip, the leather hissing through the air before snapping across Malik's back. Pain seared through him, forcing a cry from his throat. "Slaves do not fall," Hernan sneered. He struck again. "They kneel." Malik's body trembled. He could not rise, yet he could not remain still. He pressed his hands into the soil, forcing himself upright, though the world swayed around him. Blood trickled down his back, soaking into the earth. The overseer smirked and mounted his horse again, satisfied. The day dragged on, endless, the fields swallowing sweat, blood, and tears. By dusk, Malik could no longer feel his arms. His legs moved only by instinct, driven by fear of the whip. When at last the slaves were herded back into their quarters, Malik collapsed against the wall, his chest heaving, his throat dry. The boy he had helped earlier sat beside him silently, watching. In that gaze, Malik saw both fear and something else, a flicker of hope, or perhaps belief that someone stronger than them could endure. Malik closed his eyes, the overseer's words echoing in his mind. "Slaves do not fall. They kneel." But in his heart, Malik whispered a prayer, one his captors could not silence. The morning began before the sky had fully brightened. Malik's back was still raw from the lashes of the day before, the wounds burning with every movement. Yet there was no time for healing. The iron door swung open, Hernan's shadow filling the frame. "On your feet," he growled. Lazy beasts earn nothing but pain. The slaves shuffled out, chains clinking in rhythm. Malik followed, his body heavy but his eyes clear. Each step was measured. Each breath was forced. He had learned that to survive was not to live, but to endure silently. Today's work was the grain fields. The stalks stretched endlessly, demanding precision and speed. Hernan circled on horseback, whip coiled loosely in his hand. He had the face of a man who thrived on cruelty, pale, scarred by old battles, eyes cold as steel. His favorite sport was to find fault where none existed. It did not take long, Hernan shouted, pointing at a girl whose hands shook as she tied bundles of stalks. Faster. She stumbled, terrified. Malik's chest tightened as Hernan dismounted, striding toward her with the whip raised. Before the leather could strike, Malik lowered his head and bent harder into his own row. Working at a frantic pace, trying to divert the overseer's eye, it worked this time. Hernan turned his attention elsewhere, but Malik knew the overseer's gaze would return to him soon. It always did. His strength, his dark skin, his quiet endurance made him a target. Hernan wanted to break him, to prove that even the strongest man could be reduced to nothing. By midday, sweat soaked through Malik's tunic. His hands blistered, blood mixing with the grain husks. When he paused for a breath, Hernan noticed, "Up." The whip cracked against Malik's shoulder. "Do not stop until I command it." Malik bit down on his tongue, swallowing his cry. The sting traveled deep, but he refused to give Hernan the satisfaction of a scream. Instead, he whispered verses under his breath. Prayers in a language his captors despised but could not erase. Later, when the sun dipped and shadows stretched long, the slaves were marched back toward the estate. Malik's legs dragged with exhaustion. Hernan, ever watchful, spurred his horse to ride beside him. "Beast," he said coldly, "you think your silence protects you? Tomorrow, I will have you inside. Let's see if you stand so proud when the master himself watches you crawl." Malik kept his eyes down, but his jaw clenched tight. He did not respond. He could not. Yet his silence was not empty. It was resistance. That night, in the slave quarters, a faint touch of kindness broke the monotony of cruelty. Aisha, the young woman from the kitchens, slipped him a piece of bread wrapped in cloth. Her eyes darted nervously to the guards outside before meeting Malik's. "You will need your strength," she whispered. "Do not let them see you weak." Malik's throat tightened as he accepted the bread. For a moment, the chains, the lash, the endless fields, all seemed bearable. He gave a small nod of gratitude. His voice too choked to speak. When Hernan's whip cracked again in his dreams, Malik clung not to the pain, but to that fleeting gesture of humanity. The order came at dusk, Malik Hernan barked. Standing in the doorway of the slave quarters, "The master requires you in the hall tonight." The words were heavy. Slaves feared the fields, but many feared the master's hall more. Their humiliation was not just punishment, it was spectacle. Malik rose slowly, his body already trembling from the day's toil. His shackles clinked as he followed Hernan through stone corridors lit by torches. The hall was alive with noise and color. Silk banners draped from the walls. Candelabras lit the long wooden tables. Duh! And noblemen laughed as they feasted on roasted lamb and rich wines. The smell of meat made Malik's stomach twist, but it was not hunger that burned in him. It was the cruel contrast. They dined like kings while he and the others were starved into obedience. Don Rodrigo sat at the head of the table, a broad figure with a sharp beard and cold eyes. He wore velvet robes and jewels, his presence commanding silence, even amid laughter. When his gaze landed on Malik, it was not as one looks at a man, but as one appraises livestock. "Bring him forward." Rodrigo ordered. Hernan shoved Malik into the center of the hall. The nobles chuckled, some leaning forward eagerly, as if anticipating entertainment. Rodrigo raised his goblet and smirked. "Tell me, Hernan," he said loudly, "what do they call this one? The black ox?" The hall erupted in laughter. Malik stood still, head lowered. His silence seemed to amuse them more. One drunken guest slammed his goblet down. "Let him dance." Let us see how the beasts move in their jungles." A chorus of agreement followed. Rodrigo's smile widened. "Dance for us," he commanded. Malik's jaw clenched. His body stiffened. He had been whipped, chained, starved, but to be forced to mock himself for their amusement was worse than pain. He did not move. Hernan stepped forward, whip already uncoiled. "Obey your master." The lash struck across Malik's back, tearing his tunic. The nobles laughed louder. Another lash followed, sharper, crueler. Malik's body shook, but still he resisted. "Dance." Hernan roared. Tears burned in Malik's eyes. His dignity, what little remained, was slipping away. Finally, his body betrayed him. He began to move, stiff and ungraceful, a broken shadow of the man he once was. The nobles howled with delight, clapping their hands, mocking his every motion. When at last Rodrigo waved his hand for silence, Malik stood trembling, chest heaving with shame. His body ached, but his spirit burned hotter. "Good," Rodrigo said with a satisfied grin. "The beast knows his place." Malik was dragged out of the hall, discarded like a used tool. In the slave quarters, he sat in silence. Yusuf, the elder slave with weary eyes, shuffled closer. "They will break you," Yusuf muttered. "All of us are broken in time." Malik looked at him, his face streaked with sweat and tears. "No," he whispered. "They can take my body, but not my soul." Yusuf shook his head, but Malik's words lingered in the silence. Beneath his humiliation, beneath the ashes of his dignity, something else stirred, a flame that pain could not extinguish. The sun rose with no mercy. By the time Malik and the others were herded into the fields, the air was already thick with heat. The slaves bent low, their hands raw from days of endless labor, their lips cracked from thirst. Hernan rode among them on his horse, whip dangling casually at his side, his eyes sharp. Waiting for weakness, Malik was yoked to the heaviest task again, clearing a patch of rough land near the riverbank. Stones littered the soil, thick roots twisted beneath it, and the plow was dull and rusted. Every step forward was like dragging a mountain. Sweat poured into his eyes, stinging his vision. His muscles trembled, but he refused to fall. Around him, the fields became a theater of suffering. One older man stumbled and collapsed, his body too weak to rise. Hernan dismounted, kicked the man hard in the ribs, then spat in disgust. "Leave him," he ordered. 2 guards dragged the lifeless body away, discarded as if it were nothing. The rest of the slaves bent their heads lower, terrified. Death brought no ceremony here, only silence. Malik's chest tightened. He wanted to look, to honor the man even with a glance, but he knew better. Hernan's eyes were always watching. Instead, Malik pressed forward, shoulders straining against the plow. Then it happened. A boy, no more than 13, faltered, spilling a sack of grain. The sound of kernels scattering across the dirt drew Hernan's attention like a wolf scenting blood. He turned his horse sharply and bore down on the boy, whip raised. Before he could strike, Malik stepped forward. "It was me," he said, his voice rough but steady. "I spilled it." The field went still. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Hernan's eyes narrowed. Slowly, a cruel smile spread across his face. "So the beast wishes to play the hero." The whip lashed across, Malik's back before he could brace himself. Pain exploded, ripping through his skin. Again and again, Hernan struck, each blow carving fire into Malik's flesh. The boy cried out, but Malik gritted his teeth and stayed silent. His legs trembled, yet he refused to collapse. Finally, Hernan pulled back, his chest heaving with exertion. Malik's tunic was shredded, blood running down his spine, soaking into the soil. The overseer leaned down, his face inches from Malik's ear. "Remember this," Hernan hissed. "Strength only brings more pain." He spat and mounted his horse, riding away as if satisfied with his lesson. Malik staggered, nearly falling, but caught himself on the plow. His vision blurred, his breath ragged. Yet he forced himself upright, forced his feet to move. Every step was agony, but he endured. That night, in the slave quarters, the others watched him quietly. Some looked with pity, others with awe. Even Yusuf, who had long abandoned hope, studied him with new eyes. Malik's body was broken, but his silence under the lash had spoken louder than any words. When the others drifted into restless sleep, Malik lay awake. His back throbbed with pain, but his mind clung to memories of his village, his mother's hands, his father's proud voice, the call to prayer echoing at dawn. He whispered verses softly into the darkness. Words of faith, words of defiance. No lash could take them. Of defiance. No lash could take them. Nights in the slave quarters were usually drowned in silence, the silence of exhaustion and despair. But recently, Malik noticed something different, a tension in the air, a quiet murmuring after the guard's footsteps faded. Whispers passed. From one corner of the room to another, too faint for Hernan's ears, but strong enough to stir restless hearts. At first, Malik ignored it. He had seen men crushed for less. But one night, as he nursed the deep scars across his back, Yusuf leaned close. They speak of escape, the old man murmured. His voice little more than a breath. Malik looked at him sharply. Yusuf's eyes were weary, but not mocking. For once, there was something else there. Fear, yes, but also a trace of longing. Escape? Malik whispered back. There are rumors. Hills to the north, Yusuf said. They say there are still Muslims hiding there, free men. They say a slave who reaches them will never be caught again. The thought struck Malik like a blade in the dark. Freedom. The word alone felt dangerous. Later that night, Aisha crept closer, her voice trembling. We are planning, she confessed. Some want to flee. Others speak of revolt. Her eyes darted to the door, then back to him. I dream of leaving this place, Malik, but I fear the whip. I fear the gallows. Her words cut him deeply. Malik had no promises to give her, no certainty to offer. He remembered the boy he had saved in the fields, remembered the elder who had died in silence, discarded like refuse. Was escape a dream worth dying for, or a trap leading only to more blood? The days that followed grew heavier with suspicion. Hernan's gaze was sharper than ever, his whip quicker to strike. Twice, slaves were beaten savagely for speaking when they thought no one listened. Yet the whispers did not stop. They only sank deeper, quieter, like embers waiting for breath. Malik found himself torn. His body screamed for survival, urging silence, submission. But his heart carried another fire, one that humiliation and blood had not smothered. His father's voice still echoed in his mind. A man may lose everything but never his dignity. One evening, as Malik knelt in the dirt with chains heavy around his ankles, he lifted his head and caught Aisha's eyes across the yard. She held his gaze just long enough for him to see her silent plea, not just survival. Freedom. Malik turned away quickly before Hernan could notice. But inside him, something shifted. The whispers were no longer just noise. They were a call, dangerous, reckless, but impossible to ignore. That night, when Malik whispered his prayers, he added something new to them, not only for endurance, not only for strength, but for a chance, however small, to break the chains. Asterisk winter came like a slow death. The fields grew barren, the wind cut through the estate like a knife, and the slaves were given less food than ever. Thin bowls of gruel, scraps of bread, sometimes nothing at all. Children's ribs showed through their skin. Old men wasted away until they could no longer rise from the floor. Hunger gnawed at Malik's insides, but he forced himself to keep moving, to keep working. Don Rodrigo, however, seemed to revel in their suffering. One evening, he announced before his household, "Let them starve a little." Hunger sharpens obedience. Hernan obeyed gladly, tightening his grip on the lash. Malik's body weakened quickly. His wounds festered from the cold, his lips cracked, his hands bled. Still, Hernan pushed him harder than the rest. Stones had to be hauled across frozen ground, heavy logs dragged through mud. Malik's shoulders tore under the weight, but each time he stumbled. Hernan's whip struck him down. One night Rodrigo ordered Malik brought into the great hall. The nobles had gathered again, drinking deep from golden cups, while fire roared in the hearth. Malik was stripped of his ragged cloak and forced to kneel at the center. Rodrigo smiled, sipping his wine as if savoring the moment. "Hold this," he commanded. They thrust a heavy candelabrum into Malek's arms, iron cold and biting against his skin. The candles dripped wax down his shoulders, burning as it fell. Malek stood trembling, muscles screaming, while the nobles mocked him. "See how the beast shakes?" One laughed. "Perhaps he is praying to his false god," another jeered. Rodrigo rose from his chair, circling Malek like a predator. "Do you see this creature?" he asked the hall. "You feed them, you clothe them, and still they dream of being men. But look, they are nothing, not men, not beasts. Yet, just shadows." The weight of the candelabrum grew unbearable. Malek's arms faltered, the iron slipping. With a crash, it fell to the floor. The hall erupted in laughter. Rodrigo's smile vanished. His boot slammed into Malek's chest, knocking him to the ground. "On your knees," Rodrigo roared. "Bow like the dog you are." Malek coughed, his ribs aching, but he lifted his head. His eyes met Rodrigo's, not with defiance of body, but with something deeper, untouchable. A flicker of dignity. Rodrigo's face darkened. "Take him away," he ordered. Dragged back to the quarters, Malek collapsed on the floor. His body shook, but not from cold. Something inside him had broken, not his spirit, but the barrier that had kept his rage chained. He lay staring into the dark, Yusuf's words echoing in his mind. "They will break you. All of us are broken in time." "No," Malek whispered hoarsely, blood on his lips. "Not me." For the first time, his prayers were no longer only for survival. They were for justice, for vengeance, for freedom, even if it meant death. That night Malik did not sleep. The chains still bound his body, but his will had crossed a line. He would not bow again. The air inside the slave quarters had changed. Hunger still gnawed at their stomachs. The stench of sweat and sickness still clung to the walls, but now something else lingered, a dangerous anticipation. The whispers had grown louder, sharper. The old caution was gone. One night when the guards had retreated and silence hung heavy, Aisha crawled closer to Malek. Her face was thin, her eyes hollow, but her voice carried fire. "Tonight," she whispered. "It must be tonight." Around them, a small circle of slaves leaned in, Yusuf with trembling hands. The young boy Malek had once shielded in the fields, 2 strong men from the stables. Each clutched a tool stolen in secret, a hammer, a rusted blade, a sharpened stone. Their weapons were pitiful against steel and soldiers, but their desperation made them lethal. Malek's heart pounded. He knew the cost. He had seen too many. Bodies discarded in the fields, too many lives snuffed out without ceremony. But he also knew this. If they did nothing, they would wither and die in silence. He nodded. "We rise." The plan was simple, too simple. Set fire to the barns, strike in the chaos, kill the overseers, and scatter into the night. It was not strategy. It was survival's last scream. When the torches were lit, the night erupted. Flames devoured the dry wood of the barns, sending sparks into the black sky. The guards shouted, scrambling. Slaves surged from the quarters armed with whatever they had. For the first time, the air was filled not with groans of labor, but with cries of rage. Malek ran into the firelight, his body a storm of pain and fury. Hernan appeared, whip in hand, his face twisted with rage. "You think you can defy me, beast?" Malek's answer was a roar. He swung the heavy hammer he had carried from the fields, meeting Hernan Hedden. The whip lashed across his arm, tearing flesh, but Malek did not falter. He struck again and again, years of humiliation crashing down in every blow. Hernan stumbled, blood gushing from his mouth, and fell. For a moment Malek stood over him, chest heaving. The overseer's whip finally stilled, but the rebellion was already collapsing. Soldiers poured in from the estate, armed and armored, cutting down the untrained slaves with brutal efficiency. Screams filled the night. Women dragged away, men cut down, children trampled in the chaos. The firelight illuminated bodies falling one after another. Malek fought like a man possessed, but his strength could not match steel. A soldier struck him across the head with the blunt of a sword. He fell to the ground, blood streaming, his vision swimming. When he awoke, he was shackled again, his body broken. Around him, the surviving slaves knelt, beaten and bloodied. Aisha was dragged away, her cries echoing into the darkness. Yusuf lay motionless nearby, his body still. Don Rodrigo stood before them, untouched by the chaos. His voice cold as stone. "This is what happens," he declared, "when slaves forget they are slaves." The soldiers jeered. Malik, half-conscious, lifted his head. His body was wrecked, but his eyes burned with something Rodrigo could not extinguish. The chains held him down, but his spirit was aflame. The square in Cordoba was crowded. Nobles, merchants, peasants, even children, all pressed close to witness the punishment. Public executions were a spectacle, a warning, and today, Malik was the lesson. His body was barely his own. Beaten, starved, dragged through the dirt, he was more scar than flesh. Chains bit into his wrists and ankles as he was hauled onto the platform. Above him, the sky glowed a merciless blue, different to the cruelty below. Don Rodrigo stood nearby, dressed in rich silks, the very picture of power. He gestured to Malik with a sweeping hand. This man, Rodrigo's voice boomed, dared to rise against his master. He shed blood. He burned property. For this, he will be erased. Let all slaves remember, rebellion brings only death. The crowd murmured. Some spat at Malik, others laughed, but not all. Among the faces, he saw sorrow, the eyes of those who knew chains themselves, the silent prayers of the powerless. The executioner readied his blade. Malik's knees weakened, but he forced himself to stand. If he must die, he would not die crawling. He turned his face toward the sky. Memories rushed in his mother's lullabies in the distant land of his birth, his father's strong hands, the laughter of siblings whose faces blurred in the fog of time. He remembered Yusuf's trembling courage, Aisha's fire, the nameless boy who once clung to his side in the fields. Malik's lips moved, forming words soft but steady. Allah, take my soul as you gave it. Let me not be remembered as a beast, but as a man. The executioner hesitated for a breath. In that moment, silence spread through the crowd. Even Rodrigo's smug smile faltered as Malik's prayer hung in the air, a defiance deeper than rebellion. A reminder that no whip, no chain, no sword could strip him of his humanity. The blade fell. A gasp swept the square. Malik's body crumpled, but his eyes open even in death seemed to hold that final fire, refusing to dim. The overseers dragged his body away, tossing it aside like refuse. But those who had seen, those who had heard, carried something home with them. Among the slaves who remained, Malik's prayer became a whisper passed in the night, a secret flame that even Rodrigo could not extinguish. And though his chains were buried with him, his spirit lived on, a testament of suffering, resistance, and the unbreakable dignity of the enslaved.